Hello, everyone. Welcome to the semifinals of NA Spar Pre-WUDC. Whenever you're ready, I'll invite the Prime Minister to begin with the speech not exceeding 7 minutes.
Yeah, sure. IFA is having tech issues joining, so I don't know if you could please give them like a minute.
PM, are you ready to start now? The tech issues being resolved?
Yes, I am actually ready to start. I'm just the only one here. Like IFA is having issues joining, so we're not using the same device. But I think he's almost here.
Okay. All right, we'll wait another 2 minutes. But if they're not here by 20 past, then we'll get started.
All right, thanks.
I see IFA just joined.
Yeah, IFA is here.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah,
Please, whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
Fantastic. So I'll be taking POIs explicitly in chat. So I start the speech in 3, 2, 1. What are the interests of the Chinese Communist Party in the debate? I think just 3 things here. One, they care about economic growth. I think this is like the premise of the rise of the Chinese Communist Party to the Great Leap Forward. But the second thing also here is that they care about long-term political stability internally within China, which is a prerequisite for being able to maintain control over the population, but secondly, also to be able to prevent political opposition. But the third thing here is that the Chinese Communist Party cares about global dominance and being able to ensure that it's competitive globally against countries like the United States or countries within the EU, like the United Kingdom, and countries like the United Kingdom and Germany within the EU. I think the way in here and why these are the unique interests of the Chinese Communist Party is that this is what makes them stand out as the mainstay political actor within China. So things about caring about the racial purity of China are sentiments that are shared broadly, or generic sentiment that are shared by people in China, but also not sentiment that are likely to be shared by everyone within the Chinese Communist Party in itself, which means that the first 3 things that we talk about are interests that are likely to align, likely aligns with broadly the Communist Party in itself. But the second thing then is what would significantly increasing the number of immigrants look like within this debate. I think this is important to define so we don't have maybe Tim's questioning us on burden fulfillment. 2 things here. One, I think it looks like reducing the bar for foreign people to attain Chinese citizenship. This is something that doesn't exist on the status quo, where people do not have the ability to get Chinese citizenship, even though they migrate there, unless they are born of Chinese nationals. But the second thing also, it looks like increasing reducing the limits on properties that people, immigrants can acquire within China, which is a disincentive for high-skilled immigrants to move down to this country itself. I think given this, then it means that when you fall in line with this sort of requirements, then it increases the incentive for people to move here, but also means that you are able to significantly do this, like as it's described under the motion, which is the burden that we fulfilled. Given this, then I'm going to talk about two arguments, but before then, just a little bit of context. I think what you must note is that the current population, the current Chinese population, has been shrinking ever since, due to like the past policies that were implemented by the Chinese Communist Party at the point in time where the population was spiking. I think from that point up to now, like even in current like reduction in the limits of how many children people can have, has not been able to solve the problem that currently exists in terms of shrinking population. The effect that this has, that you have a whole number of old people who are largely dependent, and you have limited workforce, the shrinking workforce that currently exists within China. This requires a solution. And we think that all of the policy approach in terms of even if people were to opt into like having more children within China, it is unlikely to, in the long term, account for the economic growth of China in itself, which ultimately threatens the political stability and the political hold that the Chinese Communist Party has over China, which means that the policy in itself is not likely to materialize, in as much as like it's not likely to translate into you having skilled workforce that are going to be able to give you that sort of economic growth that is required, or going to make you economically give you the economic edge not to be able to compete with countries like United States and United Kingdom. I think given this, then first argumentation, why does this change the perception of the Chinese Communist Party? But before I continue, I would like to take a clarification if there's any. 3, 2, 1, continue. I think why this changes the perception. Note that due to the nature of China, the outward perception of individuals, of countries, is that China is largely aggressive, either to false narratives that is being perpetrated in the media about like the oppression of Uyghur Muslims in places like China, for example, or in China, or the amplification of these sort of narratives, which seeks to vilify China in itself. But the second thing also, and why this is in terms of false narratives, that China is extremely racist and individuals hate like any immigrants in itself. The problem that this creates in terms of China's dominance, it means that it's difficult for you to be able to, it's difficult for China to be able to have allies on the global scale because of these sort of false narratives that are being perpetrated. This limits the ability to have that sort of global dominance that the Chinese Communist Party in itself requires. Note that letting people into your country increases the ability to be able to fight against these false narratives that exist, because these people are able to have some sort of realistic experience within China, and they're able to counter the sort of false narratives that exist. I said POI is in chat. But more so, note that immigration is quite good at shifting alliances, because it means that you're able to align different or diverse cultures to China, and individuals are able to experience multiple cultures, and they're able to act in the shared collective interest of that particular shared collective interest, even in their diverse cultures, which reshapes the sort of narratives that exist on China. This means also that on our side, we are able to radically change what the global perception is of China and give it an edge in order to be able to form alliances, but secondly, to be able to counter the false narratives that exist currently for China, which restricts the ability for it to be able to compete. Before I continue, I take that point from O. I think this all matters in terms of being able to like enter into international international organizations, or being able to form alliances with countries, not necessarily just with investors. But given that you want to talk about investors, next point. I think also that the resources that currently are built in China for certain demographies are currently wasting, which is that they are not viable for investors. I think this is true, because note that local governments within China took massive debt in order for them to be able to invest in high stake projects. And the current decline of shrinking population means that a whole lot of these projects are currently going to waste. And this is why you have like ghost cities in places like China. Note that this is what currently makes the real estate market in China bad, and also it's currently causing the real estate crisis in China, which ultimately is a disincentive for investors. How then do we solve this problem? Note that the immigrants are getting on our side, the people who have like skilled labor, people who are like moving to China in itself, which is that you change the incentive for people to move to countries within the EU or countries like the United States. This means that you're able to solidify these former ghost cities to be economic centers and make them viable in order for you to be able to attract investors. But more so, in individuals moving to this particular country, you are able to solve the housing crisis. Because notice that the housing crisis exists because people are not purchasing houses, and that ultimately diminishes the value of housing. With people moving here, it means that they have to live in houses in themselves. Either they have to pay rent, buy a mortgage, or they have to buy a house in actuality. This means that you increase the value of housing in itself, and ultimately you make China more economically viable. This answers the economic question and also retains the political stability of the CCP. Happy to propose.
Great, thanks very much for that speech. I'll now invite the Leader of Opposition. Thanks for that speech. I'll now invite the DPM.
Okay, can everyone hear me? I hate to ask this, but could I get timestamps in chat? Moving between my Zoom and my timer might mess up my connection. Is that cool?
Yeah, sorry, it's just 1, 6, 7, and 7:15, okay?
Yeah, that's really cool. Also, guys, PIs in chat. I will be starting in 3, 2, 1. So, panel, I'm just going to start off with like a little bit of math so we can understand why China is in an economically bad situation. So the problem China has is that since the 1980s, China has been a high growth economy. What that means is that they've been growing at a rate of 12 to 15% year on year. But recently, China has dropped to a growth rate of about 5 to 7%. The problem here is simple, right? Is that 1.1, when multiplied over 5 years or 10 years, is about double what 1.05 or 1.07 is multiplied over 10 years, right? That means that the estimate for the size of the Chinese economy a decade or just 5 years from now is significantly different from the estimates that Chinese government is operating on, to the point where it's probably like half its size. The challenge that exists here is simple, right? The only way to rectify this is to ensure that China moves as quickly as possible into being a high growth economy. We think OO is right where they say high skilled labor is the solution. They claim wrongly that high skilled labor doesn't happen when you lower these immigration laws or when you're losing out immigration restrictions, and also that high skilled labor prioritizes other places. We're going to explain why that's unlikely. There are 2 reasons. One, high skilled labor doesn't necessarily always have to come from Western locations. Places like the Middle East, places like Africa have significantly worse living conditions than China and can attract a significant number of people. So that means that a lot of these people will be attracted to moving towards China irregardless, right? But another piece of context that you must understand is that because these people oftentimes grow up in conservative societies, ideologically wise, they are more in tune with Chinese society than they are with Western liberal societies. To make factors even clearer, there is an incentive to move to China for a bunch of reasons. One is that the cost of living, in contrast to like most of the Western world, is significantly cheaper. So even if you pay higher wages, this is outweighed by the fact that you just have significantly greater cost of living, which means that when it comes to like standards of living, you probably get similar levels of quality if you move towards China, especially towards cities like Shanghai or Shenzhen and all of that, right? The realistic outcome of this process is that you consistently find yourself living in like much better environments if you choose to make this decision. It means that one, China has significant pull towards these people, and in fact, probably stronger pull than West, right? But even if it doesn't, the comparative here is simple. At the point in time where you're losing the restrictions, it probably makes it easier for people to immigrate there, which means you're probably going to attract more high-skilled labor. But the thing that you need to realize is, why is low-skilled labor probably the least likely thing you're going to attract? One, low-skilled labor can't pay for a flight. It's very obvious. And it's not as if Chinese borders that are mostly surrounded with mountains on either end, or it's like very insanely cold, are things that you can just trek through and then appear in China. So China is not a place where you can easily use land immigration to enter into. So at the point in time where the core of where people come from is flights, and low-skilled immigration just can't afford flights, then it's probably not likely you're going to see a lot of low-skilled immigration. We think realistically you're going to see a significant portion of high-skilled immigration. We've shown you that they have unique like political alignments, they have unique ideological alignments, and at the point in time where they have like good opportunities for jobs, they're probably going to immigrate there. Why is this context then crucial? Oh, I'll take you later. Why is this context then crucial? Because at the point in time where you are able to attract this high school labor, a bunch of things happen. One is that the innovation and growth that you accede or you claim to want happens, right? So the development that you expect to happen occurs. But more importantly, the Chinese government gets saved from a lot of its costs, because based off these false or bad estimates that it did, it then ends up taking a significant portion of loans, because the premise behind taking a loan is that if you expect your government to grow or your economy to grow a lot faster than the rate on the loan, then you don't think the loan is a problem, because as long as people pay taxes and you keep on recouping your money and the economy keeps growing, you can pay out the tax, you can pay out the loans really efficiently, right? The problem with this miscalculation is that you then need to maintain or recreate that economic growth. High skilled labor contributes to that economic growth just simply through innovation, simply through the fact that they are present, simply through the fact that they know what's going on, through the fact that they are able to like consistently deliver. But more importantly, as I said, as Ideally pointed out before, it also prevents the wastage of money that exists in China, right? Because there have been massive cities that are built that are literally ghost cities now, because at the point in time where like you build like $1 billion worth of cities, local Han Chinese investment is put into that money, because a lot of people invested in real estate during that period. Construction companies have taken out loans to deliver so they can get that money at the point in time where loans happen. And then there is nobody to buy those houses, nobody to rent those houses, nobody to invest in those houses in the long term. You have a horrible problem. Now, the thing is this, right, is that when migrants come, I'm not going to take them in their best case scenario at this point, even when it's low skilled migrants that just come and add to the labor force and do like cheap labor so you can pump out more chips faster. Yeah, is that when those migrants come, they're going to need places to stay. They're going to need places that they need to rent, and they're going to fill up all these ghost cities and make sure that they're no longer wastes of $10 billion, right? What that means is that you end up recouping your losses. You save possibly one of the largest industries in China, but in the same vein, you save the Han Chinese people a lot of money that they wasted. At the point in time where one of the goals of CCP is obviously to protect the interests of the Han Chinese, we think that itself is valuable, we think that's beneficial, and we think just the economic growth that you get from it is useful. We also think low-skilled labor can drive like a lot of economic growth. The bulk of what Chinese economic growth has been driven up is low-skilled labor, just the ability to consistently pump out much more goods. We think immigrants will take cheaper wages. Cheaper wages with more production is going to drive your economy. Even in that really, really fucked up world, we think that still works. And in contrast to the wages they're getting paid in their country, it's still better off. So they will come if you assume they can find the flights. But at the end of the day, see you, I'll take you. See you.
How would you assess the economic growth of North Korea? And do you think it's in the interest of the leadership of North Korea to significantly relax policies in order to increase their economic growth?
Okay, let me explain why China is different, right? It's because one, Chinese government has a significant track record of success. Their approval rate is significantly much higher. They also have the means to defend themselves from misinformation in much more effective ways. So they don't have to play all those risks that you end up playing, right? But even on the narrative thing, understand that China's growth outward inevitably means that they're consistently going to interact with people and interact with people that come into those nation states, right? The idea that they would inevitably become westernized is something that if you want to prevent westernization, it's not about the population, it's about the people bringing in the ideology in the first place. So you should block out all people. We think at the point in time where they accept these people in, they accept that there's a possibility of westernization already in the status quo. But moving on deeper beyond that is that you need to understand that the reason why China benefits so much from this is that people oftentimes misunderstand Chinese policies. Nobody here can properly explain how an election happens in China. We can explain how it happens in America, we can explain how it happens in most of these other countries, but we can't explain how it happens in China. These kind of misconceptions are what makes it hard for people to trade with them. Because it's not just about governments enforcing this trade, it's about people willing to back this trade, which oftentimes doesn't happen. At the point in time where we improve economic circumstances and we end up saving China's economy.
All right, thanks for that speech. I'll now invite the DLO whenever you're ready.
Hey, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Thanks for that speech. I'll now invite the member of Gov.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Right. The current scenario in China looks like videos being circulated all over the internet of people demolishing billions of dollars of apartments because they're just lying empty in China. These billions of dollars of investment, like buildings that were supposed to be taken out, but the fact that nobody has the money to be able to buy these houses, but most importantly, there are not enough people to be able to occupy these houses, show that what China lacks in status quo right now is not necessarily the fact that it does not have resources to welcome a huge population. It's the problem that it doesn't have a population in of itself, which means that OO's argumentation of that now China has to redirect a lot of resources into welcoming migrant laborers and stuff like that, it doesn't really stand, because the way China looks in status quo, given the fact that it is undertaking a lot of initiatives like the BRI or all its like investments in Africa, shows that China does have the capacity to expand and include more population into its fold in the status quo. The reason it will do that is to be able to sustain that growth growing into the future. So it is the long-term ability of CCP to be able to maintain its power is the driving force and the reason why it should welcome more migrant laborers into its country, right? But secondarily, on this idea of low-skilled workers, I do want to clarify something. You don't need a PhD to be able to work in the semiconductor industry. If anything, we on CG stand happily to say that, oh, we do want more low-skilled workers to come into China, given that China until now has acted sort of like the industry, the manufacturing industry of the rest of the world, particularly in the fields of like, it just is in a lot of fields. And even in like specific fields of technology, you still require some like low-skilled laborers to assemble parts of like cars or semiconductors in those industries. You need thousands and thousands of those people. And if you tell me that you need thousands and thousands of PhD students to do that job for you, that would be rather ridiculous. But then what are the skills and what are the like interests of CCP? I think CCP would like to be a superpower, right? It is rising on the international level with all the sort of like initiatives that I already mentioned. It would want to maintain that in the long-term economy to achieve this goal. But secondarily, they do want to maintain power within China itself. Why? It's the idea of having stability within your own domain so that you don't have any type of like not just protest, but also so that your population lives in a level of stability where they do have this undying devotion to you, which will always help you in the longer run in also projecting a good image on the on the external, like on the outside, what do you call it, like media and stuff, saying that, oh look, my population is so happy with me, I am like very legitimate in what I do. How do we do that? Two like reasons. First of all, in immigrant supports economy. I think OG does tell you this idea that having more immigrants means that you'll get more money, but it is never really mechanized as to, how it relates to the CCP planning, like what it actually does to maintain its power within China. But second, I think like there was this entire clash in the upper half of whether these workers are going to be skilled laborers versus unskilled laborers. We buy into the OO idea and say, even if they're unskilled laborers, that is in fact a good thing, given how CCP propagates its propaganda in status quo. I think the way CCP has maintained its dominance is by projecting an image of efficacy and supremacy. This looks like China undertaking a lot of like large infrastructure projects year after year. You might think about like all the investments they've done in Shanghai or having the longest bridge in the world. To be noted, that bridge is in the middle of nowhere, but the fact that that bridge exists and it was able to employ a lot of people for some period of time, the way the media then covers these infrastructures is saying, look, this is the pinnacle of Chinese supremacy. We are so good at doing the things that we do. This is why you should keep believing in us. The problem is these infrastructures require a lot of debt. The way Chinese propaganda, or not propaganda, but like the Chinese system or strategy worked until now, they would take the debt, they would put it into the infrastructure, they would expect this infrastructure to attract businesses and demand because more people would either be able to move between places to places, get more access to like cities, and that is how they would get their money back. The problem in status quo is, given that there is a population bubble that exists, there's a population problem, there is a lack of demand in businesses, which means the country is likely to stay in debt and it won't be able to maintain those infrastructures, which directly relates to it being able to maintain its power within the country. We directly solve for that issue by having more low-skilled workers who are probably going to work at lower wages and solve for this problem. Even if you don't buy that, I just think it's very intuitive to imagine if there's a large influx of community into your place, it is going to create a service-based economy. Like you will need businesses in your local communities, you will need shops and stuff. And that is how this will be like a self-fulfilling ideology, right? But secondarily, taxes, and this is very important. Now, you on scale have more people in your country. You can like give them citizenships. That's OG mentioned, but they never actually told you why it matters. Now you can collect more income tax from the people by taxing people less. If OO's problem is that taxes are a lot and like cost of living is on a rise, we directly solve for it by just having more people paid less tax, but on net, the government still has enough money to keep itself afloat and pay for the welfare of the older people. Because the alternative in the gov's world, where this older population will be heavily dependent on the state, means that the state will have less income on net to be able to provide for its people, which means the standard of living will go down in general. Before I go on, I'll take opening.
Yeah, there are relatively few low-skilled jobs in semiconductor manufacturing, and China already has a fairly sizable low-skilled workforce. So to the extent immigrants get work there, they're probably displacing natives, which means that you get a lot less.
Thank you. Got it. But the thing is, semiconductors, I don't understand why it's the only industry you're focusing on. China also exports a lot of other things like steel and cars and like a lot of amount of things. Pick up anything in your apartment right now and it probably is made in China. So I don't think that's like semiconductor is the focus of this debate. What is the actual focus in this debate is, even if you don't buy anything, the thing is, in order to maintain power, you need a population to control over. The problem with one child policy was that it created a huge gender distribution skew. A lot of female feticide happened, which means now there are a lot of men in China who might want to have kids, but they just don't have anyone to have kids with. The situation looks so bad that in China, men were buying like 2 or 3 apartments just to be able to attract wives, and still they were not able to do that. At a point in time, we are able to attract more immigration into our country. We are lowering the threshold for people to be able to like integrate into the country. It is at that point of time that you are more likely to have matches, but on net, you will get more citizenship. So in the longer run, if an immigrant family moves into China, their kids will probably have kids in China, and then that is how you increase the population. Assimilation will be easier, because I feel this is gov fiat to say that, oh, Confucius Institution and media funding by China into other countries will probably make those people more amenable to like learning and integrating into China and stuff like that. So I don't think that will be a problem. But now you have more citizens in the long term, and you're able to balance the gender gap, and that will be the key to solve any problems that a gov might like, identify, and to be able to maintain CCP's power over the future. For all these reasons, we're proud to propose.
Thanks for that speech. I'll now invite the member of opposition.
Hi, am I clearly visible and audible?
Yep.
Fantastic. POIs in chat, please. If I haven't taken one by 5:45, you can interrupt me. Second. Okay. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. We're going to analyze to you a very known and obvious CCP interest, the Great Firewall, why the CCP cares about keeping external information and cultural and ideological influences out of the country, and why they care about keeping the cracks in the facade and the truth about how well their communist system is functioning inside the country. And I'm going to explain why these significant number of immigrants are a huge bypass to the Chinese firewall, undermining an effort that China has invested many billions of dollars into, and more importantly, has been willing to forego all of the benefits of an open and free access to the internet, because that is how much they value maintaining the Great Firewall of China. One brief rebuttal before that to governments. I don't think China needs more population. I understand they have less now than they had a few decades ago, but that, or in terms of growth, but that doesn't mean that they're utilizing all their population. They have huge rural populations that can be transformed into a more productive people industries, but I also think China is transitioning away from labor-heavy industries and moving up from low tech to middle tech. I think that most of the factories are leaving China. I think that the housing crisis is a supply side, not a demand side crisis. And most importantly, I think that through the BRI, China already has access to a global workforce. They can mine their resources in the mines of Africa using African workers. They don't need to bring those workers to China. If anything, they prefer to pay cheaper wages in more developing countries. They prefer to access more of the diverse resources rather than just what's within their country. I think this takes down the entire cases of population. Let's get into how this mechanizing, how the Great Firewall keeps foreign ideas out of China. First, China heavily censors external corporations and media. Google Maps in China depicts Chinese-drawn borders. Disney movies are edited to reflect Chinese values. This creates a smokescreen of international legitimacy, that these Hollywood or California companies are agreeing with the Chinese narrative, and it creates a false faith that China isn't just manipulating them. China, secondly, bans content that doesn't pass the state censor, with heavy punishments, including imprisonment or torture for lawbreakers that are caught with illicit content. And finally, China creates alternatives that are fully state-controlled, like Weibo, which is Chinese Facebook, meets YouTube, meets Amazon, meets state surveillance app that teaches people that their speech is monitored and they will self-censor themselves without the state even having to intervene. The bottom line is, whatever information that gets in is fully monitored and censored by the CCP. Why does the CCP do this? 3 reasons. First, the danger of the spread of Western ideals and values, like personal rights, like the ideas of the French Revolution, or those of the fall of the Berlin Wall, like the right to vote and representation and whatnot. Within China, expression of these rights is banned, and even hints to these ideals in American media and culture get edited and soft censored. But secondly, there's the danger of the spread of anti-CCP information. The CCP makes claims about sovereign borders, about history, about the tangible size of their economy that are internally treated as fact, but are actually part of a mass propaganda effort to maintain faith and buy-in of the public. Third, the danger of contact with and bonding with Westerners. Being fond of Western foods and goods and Taylor Swift and Marvel movies leads to a desire for a Western system. Growing fond of Paris, of London, having friends in the Western world leads to an unwillingness to stand up and fight for communism and the Chinese motherland. How do these significant numbers of migrants bypass the Great Firewall? First, I want to characterize the countries they come from. OGs say these are going to be poor neighbors of China, mostly from the bigger, more populous countries. These are the Philippines, Indonesia, India, Malaysia, Bangladesh, countries that 1, have internet access, 2, have democracies, and 3, are mostly in the Western sphere of influence. This is true for basically all of Asia outside of like Pakistan, Laos, and Cambodia. Let's mechanize the effect of these migrants and how they bypass the firewall. The first method is they grew up with access to Western media cultures and views, often in democracies. These ideas are internalized in them. They believe them. They are subconsciously guided by them. They can't help but discuss them, and they are fundamentally different to someone who grew up absent any exposure to these values. But secondly, they were taught alternative facts to what the CCP teaches. This exposes the subjectivity of the CCP information at best, but shows that it's a lie and serves as an avenue to confirm the suspicions of Chinese at worst. And thirdly, they maintain contact and connections to their families in their home countries. They travel back and forth, meaning we have repeat opportunities to be exposed to Western narratives. We become very aware of the contrast and lies between East and West. And this also serves as an easy tool for Chinese dissidents to get fact-checking or to send information in or out. What are the impacts of this? First, we erode the trust in the system, exposing the degrees of propaganda and manipulation of the CCP. Secondly, we normalize the West and the notion of integration into the Western-led world order. Third, we sow seeds of doubt in the minds and hearts of future leaders who one day may become the Gorbachev and Yeltsin selling out China to the capitalists. And 4, we necessitate worse further crackdowns. POI opening. Closing.
If we are to believe that the workers are going to be low skilled, they are maybe not educated and not exposed to democracy, but the local tensions that exist between, say, like Muslims and Hindus in India. So why will they protest for Taylor Swift?
The problem is all of these people grow up on Facebook because Facebook ensures that even in countries that are rate limited, they subsidize smartphones and they make sure that the use of Facebook in particular is absolutely free. You cannot claim that these tens or hundreds of millions of immigrants don't have this exposure that I analyzed for you that they have. I want to also frame how China keeps external info in, because the same mechanisms I described for how we keep information out also keeps information in. We heavily regulate information and punish people for breaking it. This is important because it lets China maintain a fog of war, keeping the West from truly able to assess their economic and military might. It helps to maintain an illusion of strength versus their allies, and it helps to dissuade local dissidents from cooperating with the West. The same mechanization I give you for how these immigrants who keep moving in and out brings information in, also lets information out. They are curious to share their experiences to their local connections and local news sources, and they repeatedly leave and transfer information. For all of these reasons, go with closing opposition.
Thanks for that speech. I'll now invite the Gov Whip.
Just checking that I'm audible. Cool. POIs in chat, please. Again, unless it's like 5:50 and I haven't said anything, then feel free to echo me. China needs people. It needs people to have kids. It needs people to demand goods and services from its own economy. It needs people to, open up their own shops and create small local industries in the massive, to avoid, what Srishi talks to you about in terms of like the ghost cities just collapsing. Opening government's framing is largely correct in terms of saying that there is a problem in terms of population, but then all of their analysis in all of their cases about like things in the short term in terms of like filling in a short-term skills gap or getting a little bit more labor. The thing though about the population problem is that it's a fundamentally long-term one. Right now, the population distribution in China isn't so bad that there's over like 1 billion people, let's say, who are, on pension and are no longer giving back to the state via work and taxes. But it will get to that point in terms of like the level of asymmetry between those who are dependent and those who are contributing. We're able to solve for that uniquely for a number of reasons, because I'm unsure really in terms of like how many more skilled laborers are coming in, because everyone else in the debate, or like in top half, admits that like realistically some amount of this is happening anyways. I'm not really sure how much change there is here. OG say maybe some unskilled laborers come in, but that's fine because like they can also like do things. We say it's particularly important in terms of growing the population. That is, and not only if you just have like women coming in from like anywhere in the world. I think Srishti gives you a ton of reasons at the end of her speech as to why people are going to be able to assimilate well, to the extent that a lot of the countries that these people are coming from have like, there's lots of like Chinese funding of their own media internally. That means that like pro-China news comes out a lot more. You probably have a much better understanding of what Chinese culture is, although obviously it's not a monolith, but you still have a much better understanding of it as someone who is likely to choose to move to China than like, someone from like the West that has the fairly narrow conception that talks about in terms of like, oh, well, I'll just choose to go to the West instead of skilled labor. They fundamentally misunderstand the kinds of people who would make a decision like this to move over to China. But also just in terms of like the way that Chinese media can like frame what these like the value of these immigrants in terms of like there's obviously broad archetypes of what what a Chinese person ought to be. You can still say that like someone who is an immigrant can still fulfill many of these things, but also that you have like it is your duty to like teach them like the Chinese way and things like this as well. So at that point they can assimilate. That means that they can we can claim lots of benefits from this because maybe some of these people will move and they'll move with their whole families. At that point, maybe they themselves aren't going to contribute, like they themselves are contributing to making the population younger by virtue of simply moving, but their kids assimilate. They go to the same schools as other people. They're able to do these things. At that point, we're probably able to create a younger population in the long run because these people are often coming from other cultures where like there's big families where they have 5 kids, 6 kids, 7 kids. So, once they have a job and to the extent that they're moving to a country that is richer, at that point they're able to like, access these things. But even if it's just like women who are moving over themselves now, at least some of them might get married to Chinese men. At that point, we're able to use more of the houses. We're able to have more kids who will then in themselves be contributors to the Chinese economy. The weighing of this versus opening government is that all of their fixes, to the extent, I'm not really sure how often they occur anyways, but we're literally saying millions of people are now going to be workers who otherwise would not be in the Chinese economy. But obviously this just means that there's like more everything in terms of like the state having money and these kinds of things in the short run. But in the long run, we're able to avoid the massive harms of like the state simply not having enough money to operate and having to choose between like sending really old people back to work or like pumping tons and tons of money into pensions and into like the healthcare system that they simply do not have. So in term and this is important because like in the long term, there are simply more people who can experience these harms generally to the extent that that is true. We should value long term over short term. This is important then when we get into response versus opening opposition. So opening opposition say, well, we're trying to move to a service-based economy and we need to like end the factories. This is obviously insane. You can do both. The Chinese economy still does have plenty of money that's able to spread. Moreover, you're still able to get foreign investment into like the development of AI and things like this. Note that many of the kinds of like tertiary sector things, like in terms of tech that OO want to talk about, are largely being developed on an open source level between like people in Alibaba and people in Microsoft. So I'm not sure why this matters. But in terms of keeping wages sufficiently low, you're able to avoid the middle income trap in the first place by bringing in foreign workers because they're able to anchor the wages as being lower. That is, if they're used to getting less money anyways, that is, their arrival in the country is somewhat conditional anyways. That is, say they can anchor that wage as being lower, so we don't have those problems with the middle income trap anyways, even if they're unskilled, because we're able to lower wages, artificially suppress it by bringing these people in. I'll take opening. Once has anyone in opposition proved anything to do with overpopulation? Nothing at all. I think the fact that there's literal massive ghost cities in China would suggest that their population is not overpopulation. I have no reason to believe why that's the case. Lastly, though, they say, people can protest to the extent closing opposition are right that there's this like gigantic like surveillance app that means that like the CCP knows where you are at all times. It sees you when you're sleeping and knows when you're awake, etc., etc. I'm unsure how much people can actually like threaten the state, which brings me to responses to closing opposition. They talk about keeping info in. It's extraordinarily unclear to me as to like why someone who's working in a factory is going to be able to access information that is so sensitive that it could cause harm to the CCP. I just don't think this is likely. Weigh that against the benefits to the CCP in terms of having a population that like, sustains the economy in the long run. But in terms of keeping foreign information out, these people are often like from like relatively like conservative countries themselves, have relatively similar views to those which are espoused in China. Facebook isn't necessarily this super I love America website. This doesn't make sense. For those reasons, I implore you to vote for closing government.
All right, thank you for that speech. I'll now invite the opposition whip.
Hey, am I visible and audible? Perfect. Top half agrees on 3 metrics without much prioritization between them. But if my goals are winning this competition and food and shelter, it's obvious that I prioritize dying. Our extension then is OO says these will be unskilled workers who won't help the economy. Look, we generally agree, but we think that just matters a lot less than the ideology of these immigrants, and that's where we win this debate. Let's be very clear. At best, the other 3 teams in this debate give you about a 2% sway either way in GDP. I could weigh why it's going to go down and not up, but it really doesn't matter for us. Let's use some really, really basic intuition here. Kim Jong-un maintains power for decades, while the Democratic Party in the United States cannot keep power for more than 8. Why is that? Because material conditions don't matter nearly as much as silencing the opposition and convincing people that you are the only option. That is why even a slight threat, note, even if we don't prove an absolute overthrow, the threat of overthrow or of more resistance is great enough that it has a much greater impact on the CCP's primary interest of maintaining power and being able to rule, which is prior and more important to all of their other interests of exactly how the country looks. In fact, all the other interests only serve the CCP maintaining power. We think at that point, case is clearly the most important in this debate. Why then is our case true, and how does essentially the only real opposition that we get from closing government, their only real rebuttal is, oh, these people are coming from countries with relatively similar views. I think I already analyzed why they're coming from democracies, but I think it's critical to note that in addition to coming from democracies where they're used to being able to vote, these are people who, obviously from the fact that they immigrated, are used to freedom of movement, all sorts of freedoms. They're also used to freedom of religion. In fact, most of the surrounding areas are Muslim countries. Uyghur Muslims, as it is well China, are not treated very well, to say the least. It bans involvement in any religion if you want to be a party member, means basic freedoms to which these people are greatly accustomed simply do not exist to any degree in China. That means that, yes, these people find China to be a deeply illiberal country in ways that contrast to what they're already used to. Note, what does this mean? It means that these people feel like their rights are being violated. It means that they also come in knowing what the world is like and knowing what should be available to them. And critically, this is how the USSR fell. It's how all sorts of regimes fall. When protests grow, you eventually reach a tipping point where the West is able to support the dissidents. That means today, when there are protests, even in Hong Kong, we did not get enough support from the West because we think it's still relatively few people. It's not widespread enough. At the point at which more and more people in China are disillusioned, we get this. This happens for 2 main reasons. Firstly, just the motion says significant immigration. We're talking about a lot of new people. But secondly, and we analyzed this and got no response, they ask us in a POI, oh, but why do these poor laborers have that much impact? It is not just these people, not yet OG, but I'll take you later. It is not just these poor people. Ultimately, these are people who, like they said, are in the school systems, are in jobs, integrate within communities to a certain degree. They tell people what it's like. They explain what is missing. They let people know that this is not the way life should be. The Great Firewall of China works because it is absolute. One crack in the wall, and we start to see flooding. It is like a dam. The moment at which people know that they are missing a lot, even if they don't get access to all of it, is the moment at which their anger boils over. When you find out that you have been lied to for years, you are all of a sudden disillusioned, this creates massive levels of anger. These levels of anger are ultimately what lead to people stepping it up. But note, lastly, I think we do enough to show that even just on likelihood, if there is a 10-20% chance of this type of overthrow, we absolutely win the debate because the CCP has to prioritize that above anything else. And we don't think that a 2% change in GDP either way is enough to do nearly as much. But also, in case for whatever reason you don't buy that, it's important to note Ayal's analysis is not just binary, it's scalable. That means more protests and dissent lead to less consolidation of power. This means things like less ability to shape and control your population. Less control, meaning it is less beneficial to be part of the CCP. It means you can't pass your job on to the next of kin and keep these within the family. It means we don't get the oligarchy. We don't get literally the basic interest of the CCP today are those people staying in power. It means people like Xi Jinping can't stay in power for life because they have accountability. Even if they're not kicked out immediately, the very threat of overthrow, the fact that people think they have some say, threatens the essence of what the CCP is today. It does not allow people there to maintain their basic comforts, the same levels of even bribery, and the things that they get away with today, they cannot get away with tomorrow. All of that is way more important than the slight change in economy. But just to be absolutely sure, I'm going to explain to you why the economic thing doesn't work for side government anyway, in case we need that. Before that, OG, yes.
Okay, so your mechanism is poor people, low-skilled labor based on your frame from Middle East, Asia, and Africa, where democracy has failed, come to China, get better lives, and think, oh, we want democracy.
No, our analysis is these people come, they tell everyone what has happened. These people come from democracies to a non-democracy. They are used to better life. And yes, when democracy failed there, they overthrew the government because they understand that as a possibility. We think people who have seen governments overthrown are exactly the type of people. And the very fact that they break through the firewall, they break the illusion that exists in China today. Look, a 2% decrease in GDP is bad. Discovering that your government has lied by 10% for years is much, much more critical to changing things. But now let's talk very quickly about all of the cases on economy and why it doesn't work. CG's one main extension there is, oh, these immigrants will have kids. It's just not true. Historically, single women do not migrate. That's especially true in places where they have big families. Why is this the case? Three main reasons. A, the burden of economic support is generally on the man, so a man will immigrate either with his family or by himself. B, the perceived lack of safety for women traveling alone, especially in places like the Middle East. And C, men have a greater comfort level of manual labor, meaning we're not getting like single women moving to China and all of a sudden lots of babies. But now let's just deal with the very basic, oh, economy gets better. CG says, oh, you don't need a PhD to make semiconductors, so we'll still get people. It's a straw man. If you can make semiconductors or you can work in a viable industry, you can get a visa to the USA, to Canada, which is desperate for skilled migrants. And given that OG concedes that the perception of China is so bad in the West, there's just no reason that any people who can go elsewhere will be going, so we don't get this. We also just think that this whole idea of service-based economy doesn't work like that unless you're importing rich people to buy the goods. We don't get that. So there's no economic benefit on Gov side. But even if there is, the main interest of the CCP is not falling, not being destroyed. We explain how they will likely be toppled for all those reasons. CO.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that speech. And thanks everyone for a good debate.